Trust the media, they're all full of lies. What you know a little bit, all hoping you die. Live free or die. Live free or die. Live free or die. Live free or die.
Welcome to another exciting edition of Hardfire TV, where we always try to have insightful and intelligent conversations about current events and classical liberal principles. My name is Cameron Weber. I'm an economist, a writer, and a historian and producer of Hardfire TV. About 3 months ago, at the beginning of Russia's invasion, is that the right word, Vlad? In March 2022, we did a show called The Ukraine Situation, where we discussed, among other things, that the war is the health of the state. War is the health of the state. We also discussed how NATO is an antique and should have been disbanded at the end of the Cold War. Recently, a partisan friend of mine in Los Angeles, hello, Raymond, how are you? Asked how we would end NATO. My response was simple: we just stop funding it. and no, we do not need UN approval to do that, to stop funding it. Today, we're going to be talking specifically about the use of sanctions in US foreign policy, something we didn't have time to discuss last time. Are sanctions a good idea? We will discuss this question from a classical liberal perspective. Today, returning to our show, for the second time as we discuss the Ukraine situation, I've got Brooklyn Vlad. Welcome, Vlad. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, pleasure to be here again. Thank you for having me.
Good to see you again. Okay, so let's go. Today we're talking about sanctions. Sanctions are when a nation state uses its power over the international finance system to freeze the assets of certain peoples and organizations. For example, many, but not all, Russian oligarchs have had their bank accounts frozen and other assets seized by the United States Treasury Department in retaliation for Putin's invasion of Ukraine. My personal take on sanctions are from a fair process, rule of law perspective. It's hypocritical for the US regime to take assets of non-US citizens without a trial by jury. Why should the trial by jury system be eliminated for people who aren't US citizens? Isn't this the behavior of an empire? Vlad, what do you think about sanctions from a philosophical perspective?
I like what you said, but I think we can both agree on, from an economic point of view, that eventually both sides will be losers with sanctions.
Yeah.
Sanctioned and the sanctionee will eventually have a downturn in their economies over it. Wouldn't you say?
Exactly. It's a trade war as any other war. I mean, sanctions are a trade war like any other barriers, right? It's just a financial trade war, and free trade is what brings wealth. And I mean, we're finding that now under the COVID era with all the lockdowns that occurred and how that's helped contribute to all this inflation. But yeah, right. Both the people who get sanctions put on and those who administer the sanctions are harmed. But it's the people who are harmed, not the governments, right?
Right.
I mean, I like to use the example of Korean Kim. I mean, he has no problem getting cigars and cognac, right? Okay, here's John. He has no problem getting cigars and cognac, right? Even though there's been sanctions on North Korea forever, right?
Right. And as you mentioned before, at an earlier time, Cuba. How long has an embargo been going on? How long have we been dealing with that? And to what end? How effective are sanctions?
Exactly.
Alone, do they do anything? I mean, sanctions alone.
Hello, John Clifton. Glad you could join us.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of switching computers at home, and
one just hangs on everything.
Well, good. We glad you could make it. We were a little bit concerned.
Okay. Well, what do we got?
We're talking about sanctions.
And, yes.
Well,
I don't know if you're underway or not.
I'm sorry.
I don't know if you're underway or not. Or
Oh yeah, we had to start because we only had 45 minutes on the Zoom.
Done. And what I'm saying was that sanctions alone do not have an immediate impact. It takes a very long time for sanctions to work. You basically have to starve the population into doing something. And sanctions usually work with conjunction with some military force, like let's say Iraq. What do we have in Iraq? We had years and years of sanctions on Saddam Hussein until we decided to smack him around, and then we got the job done.
And he never suffered financially through sanctions.
I'm sure he didn't. Not as much as the people who were going out without electricity at one point and just common basic needs. But you have also the Castro regime in Cuba,
right?
And that hasn't even changed.
We've had sanctions there, I said, since before I've been alive. Ever since 1959, we've had sanctions or trade embargoes and sanctions. And so my question, I guess, for both of you is, are sanctions really supposed to hurt those in power? We know that Korea Kim has no trouble getting cognac and cigars. Or is it really supposed to starve the population so the population then overthrows their corrupt regime? And I'm using the word corrupt as in I can't find a regime that's not corrupt.
If I may get in at this point, I get belatedly, I understand four things about sanctions. One, it's really a form of war, when traditionally understood or literally understood under the international conventions. It's a form because it's provocative. It shuts down a country and puts them in a position of having to decide to respond militarily as one option to attempts to disrupt its own operation. And that's what Russia found itself in. I believe it was prepared for sanctions, but it was nonetheless a hindrance to its operations. And as we all know, historically, the most famous example of this in recent American history was sanctions that were placed upon Japan that helped encourage it to launch a military offensive in Pearl Harbor. But the second issue is that in this particular case, which is the relevant issue, most countries are not really participating in it. They're finding ways to dance around getting materials from Russia. They are flat out saying they aren't going to participate. And I'm talking about outside of Europe. Europe is trying to be playing the whole world hegemony game where it works with the United States on whatever it is. And virtue signaling that we stand for the Ukrainian people, despite the fact that this conflict is instigated by a belligerent Ukrainian government, regardless of what its people want. It's not, they're not participating in it. And the third issue is it's backfired as a result of this.
Yeah, very much.
And as a result, number 4, it reflects a unipolar view of the world where we got one big block of countries that represent freedom and democracy and everything, and another set of countries that are supposed to work with the bloc or the West or the world empire in its domination of all countries that don't comply with.
Coalition of the willing.
Yeah.
Not even allies, but just coalition of the willing.
Yeah, I'll reflect more on this later and proceed.
Well, I introduced the thing by saying that it violates the fair process rule of law, where you're, especially for private citizens, they get sanctions put on like we're doing with the Russian oligarchs without a rule of law and fair process. So to say that we're helping spread democracy by putting on sanctions which are against the rules of classical liberalism and democracy and the rights of man is very hypocritical. Well, hypocrisy, 1, 2, they don't work. 3, the starves the people, and Kim has no trouble getting cognac and cigars.
Well, also, I'd like to add that cutting ties, economic ties with other countries, leads to a greater chance of war. and future conflicts. Doesn't trade promote
Exactly.
peace?
Yeah, mutual interests.
Exactly.
The more shared mutual interests you have, the more peace you'll have, right?
But we have a selective mutual interest situation now. So an Indian representative speak the other day on the questioning, so why don't you participate with the sanctions and with Ukraine and the US and NATO's efforts? And she says, it looks like, hey, to us that whenever we have a problem, it's our problem. But when you guys have a problem, it's our community's problem. And they have to come in and pitch in and be dependent on to side with the West, even though they're a fifth of the world's population in that particular case. And same for China, same for other countries that are sizable and have their own agendas and their own situations. They're supposed to be in solidarity with this coalition that says it's of the willing, but increasingly it's put upon to always side.
That's how we started our first show on this, the Ukraine, where Vladimir says that the mainstream media is couching this in terms of another Cold War, and that's exactly what, John, what you're saying. It's the West versus everyone else, and that's exactly what you ended up with, the non-allied countries during the Cold War. But back to the situation on the sanctions backfiring for Russia. Yeah, Russia is now selling their oil for rubles. The ruble is appreciating. The dollar is. This could mean the end of the dollar hegemony over time. Vlad says sanctions take time, but this could central banks are holding less dollars as reserves now because of the sanctions, right? So we're not going to be able to run up our 30 trillion federal government deficit if people aren't going to hold dollars.
Yeah. Right. Sanctions also, just to throw a quick point in here, it seemed to operate more efficiently for the country imposing them against the other, or the bloc imposing them against the target country, when the country in question is like an import economy that requires to receive a lot of goods. Russia, on the other hand, is like more like an export economy with its oil, with its special minerals and other architectural exports.
Yeah,
and sanctions hurt the countries that can't get that stuff anymore from Russia if they're prevented from doing so. And then you see sudden shortages of everything such as what's going on now in the U.S. economy.
It's also
people
in New York City, as far as I understand.
Oh, yes. I have a story about New York City. I'm going to take advantage of that open-ended rhetoric there, Vlad, is that we've been going to this place in Bay Ridge to buy Mediterranean foods. And starting about a month ago, they would offer 25% cash discount. Right? As soon as we start freezing up the international financial systems, here you have these people who immigrated to the United States. The store has been there like 5 years or something. And then in the last month, they've been saying, we don't really want your credit card. We want your cash. And now I've been by there and I think the place is closed. So I think they got their accounts frozen or something like that. Who knows? It's so difficult to get a bank account in the United States.
I will go if Vladimir doesn't want to say something here. I want to just say there are other ways around all of these sanctions. For example, you mentioned the ruble in terms of purchases. Some countries, like some in Europe, said we will not stand for this. We will not take money. Take oil and have to pay it rubles. But then quietly, a lot of countries have gone to a third country and did a little laundering bit where they use dollars to do an exchange, and then that third party country then exchange their oil for
exactly
rubles.
the The sanctions are only for known accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So you have the offshore accounts that aren't even touched. Right. So it's just an example of virtue signaling that's more harmful than helpful.
Yeah. And I just want to say you can extend that to other things like the intent to cut off Russia from the SWIFT economic system, which is the main banking system that the West uses to exchange value in currency and do transactions. They just switched over to the Chinese system.
There you go.
Forgot the name of it, but it goes ahead and it serves more people actually physically than SWIFT ever did, and they're getting away with it, you know, because obviously because there's more than one system in the world. It's not a unipolar world anymore, where one group of countries has everything, or one country like the U.S. can sustain this full spectrum dominance it's supposed to have economically, militarily, geopolitically.
Well, the thing about the U.S. dollar being the hegemony is that we're backwards in technological advancement and monetary payment systems, and we're backwards because we've had the hegemony and the monopoly. In Europe, I mean, they had, you know, click and pay for years. Bitcoin ATMs for years. The U.S. is behind because of this monopoly we've had. So maybe in a certain way, breaking up that monopoly is a good thing. At least for the long-term repercussions of the ability of the United States to balance its budget. Because if the dollar is not going to be the predominant hegemony, people aren't going to be holding our debt. And if people don't hold our debt, then the U.S. is going to have to not run up budget deficits as much.
Very true.
Have we covered everything?
Well, I think one other thing here to bring up about exchanges,
I use SWIFT at the State Department, by the way. That's how you get
yeah,
bonds.
it's the State Department determines
Like the bonds are paid through SWIFT. Like Russia's about to maybe default on a bond for the first time since World War I because they can't make the payment through the SWIFT system. Maybe is what's going on.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut.
Nah, but I don't know what to say something here, but there's a longer argument here about the inflation issue. That is, the U.S. has been printing out money through the Federal Reserve for its own domestic purposes for years. They just crank out the money, or the digital equivalent of counterfeiting. And
it's called typing money instead of printing money.
But what's really the substance behind what keeps the dollar valuable has been these oil, precious metals transfers, mainly the oil. And the other countries, therefore, have had to deal with, because they're forced to pay for oil in dollars, they've had to use money that's depreciating. And they're spending more and more money of their own currency or from real value to buy dollars that are increasingly worth less to get the oil. And that's a really sad situation. But if Russia succeeds in switching most of the world to the ruble or alternate currencies, then our value of our currency is going to collapse through the floor, because now it's not tied to oil anymore. It's not as crucial to oil transactions as it used to be.
I think it's just a slow decline of empire. I don't think it's like the housing boom and bust. I think it's just a slow decline of empire as people hold less dollars, as the ruble floats and the yuan floats. That there'll be three currencies, not just the dollar and the euro. The euro is competing too. Oh boy. We've got 10 minutes. Chelsea, how are we doing on time? All right. Yeah, we've got about 6 minutes left.
Okay, I can talk some more, but I don't want to take away all of
Well, you want to talk about? I saw about NATO's expansion with Finland and with Sweden.
Yeah, right.
So, like to talk about that? Stay on that subject.
Yeah. Before we get to that, I wanted to show this graphic from Reason magazine, where it shows, it's pretty funny and it'll look nice on TV, but officials seizing Russian yachts now may steal Americans' property in the future. So if we're already engaging in this rules of law violation overseas, why wouldn't it happen? Why wouldn't it happen to domestic enemies of whoever's in power?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, because first of all, I just love the term oligarchs. Rich people, because they're Russian, to become oligarchs. Country, and one day, what we're doing here is creating a blueprint for the seizure of their property one day. So one day somebody's going to take, I don't know, maybe take Elon Musk, SpaceX, or I don't know, Bill Gates, but what makes our oligarchs any less immune to somebody's whims one day?
Exactly. So we're right back to the NATO expansion. Yeah. Why don't we see? We've got 5 minutes left, so let me do the 5-minute thing here, and we'll make sure we cover NATO expansion. Okay. My final observation on this topic of sanctions, trade barriers, and nationalism is that, and we've talked about this somewhat, is that human relations are not a zero-sum game. Shared interests, shared economic interests bring peace as incentives become aligned. State financial and trade interventions bring war as political barriers create unnecessary divisions.
That's always been the sound internal principle of real free market commerce, where you instead of having a situation where you're natively belligerent against another country or set of countries, you become more dependent upon each other through trade, through enterprise, and that prevents the motive to go to war to be realized. You're just going ahead through the motions of starting one up.
Exactly. I mean, we owe China. China hasn't bought any new U.S. T-bills, any new U.S. Treasury debt in several years. But they own $2 or $3 trillion worth of U.S. government debt. They're not going to attack us when we owe them $2 or $3 trillion.
If China stops lending to us altogether, they know the U.S. economy would kind of collapse because of that problem. We have nobody to borrow money from anymore, and
I don't know if that's a bad thing. I don't know.
It's not bad economically for somebody to cut the spigot off with somebody who's a spendaholic, but then all of this entire spending monolith that we have here would become tumbling down. And at the same time, China doesn't want to be a debtor without a debt-ee, on the scale of trillions of dollars.
Yeah. So,
So
sanctions, I think we've decided sanctions are ridiculous. Can we agree on that? Number one, they don't work. Number two, all they do is virtue signal. Number three, it just degrades people's standard of living. And the oligarchs, or those in power, the elite, continue to buy cognac and cigars.
Certainly not these sanctions right now. They don't have the teeth. They don't have the staying power.
And certain people are exempted based on their closeness with whoever's in power. I mean, it's a interesting story of who has sanctions placed against them and why, and who does not have sanctions placed against them and why. But that's a little too political for us. We'll just keep it general.
Yeah. I'm glad that things have tracked more or less according to what I imagined at the beginning of this thing 4 months ago, with China, the invasion happening and everybody saying Russia had overreached and they were going to be defeated, and the opposite has really happened on both the military front and the economic front. China is resilient, and Russia is resilient, and I keep bringing China up because I think they are helping Russia to a large extent to defeat the U.S. and NATO's attempt to perpetuate this unipolar apparatus, which is clearly
very good. Yeah.
Apart.
The new Cold War, which
It's perpetual war. That's what we've been at for decades.
Since Cuba sanctions since the year before I was born. But anyway, we need to wrap it up. Any concluding, I guess, any concluding comments?
I think Russia will prevail military, which it already has, in terms of what it wanted to accomplish, which was clearly, as stated at the beginning, to take over the eastern end of Ukraine and to just go about ending all this belligerent overtures the country was making by getting rid of its weapons, taking out its military forces, and it's over, from the military point of view.
Yeah.
Other than the West trying to perpetuate it, and in their attempts to use sanctions as an intermediary way of dealing with it, that hasn't worked out either.
It's like Popeye flexing his muscles.
Mhm.
Vlad, any last comment before we?
And I think it looks to me that Russia's already won at least what they've set out to get those eastern provinces of theirs, and otherwise they would be attacking the capital. They would be destroying the infrastructure of the country.
Right,
That's not over a country. So what we hear on our news is just absolute baloney. And I just want to leave with that. Like, whatever you hear on the news, it's just utter propaganda.
And war is the health of the state. So why would we not expect this from our current administration? And well, anyway, I'd like to say thank you very much to Brooklyn Vlad, John Clifton. Thank you for watching. Thank you for participating. And to our audience, thank you for watching Hardfire TV. Each of our monthly episodes appears several times on Brooklyn Free Speech Cable and with synchronous streaming through BRIC Arts Media website. We have more than 75 shows on our YouTube channel. So if you're interested in more classical liberal topics and ideas, just search on YouTube, Hardfire and Brooklyn Free Speech. See you next time on Hardfire, and thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Great.
What do you